So let's have a look at the next box again. Mailboxes, you did me proud with your packing, with your bits of wood and that kind of stuff, very good. One of the disadvantages with this style of blade, incidentally, is that it looks symmetrical, but it's not. It's only got one edge. And sometimes you find you're trying to cut something and they're like, why isn't this cutting? And it's because you're using the back edge instead of the front edge. So a funny little detail, one advantage of things like Bowie knives and, or Bowie, whichever you prefer, and saxes and things like that, is you can immediately recognise which is the cutting edge and which is the blunt edge. Having a symmetrical blade which is single edged can be mean that sometimes you're trying to cut something with the back instead of the edge, because it's not immediately recognisable which is the front and which is the back. There are certain types of trench knife which are like that, so you know that's one advantage of something like a Fairbairn Sykes dagger, is that it doesn't matter which edge you're cutting with. If you quickly pull it out and you go to cut someone's throat or do whatever you're going to do as a soldier, obviously, then it doesn't matter which edge you've got round, because either one will do the job. So there's an advantage of two edges. Disadvantage of two edges, more maintenance, need to sharpen them more. Open up. Right, we're in. Whew. Right, here we go. Yes, and I even got the hilt end. Always good to pull the hilt end, because you can pull hilts out more easily than you can pull it from the other end. Go away, box. Right, bubble wrap. Good, good, good. What is this? Oh, I think I know. Now, this is a really rare thing. And I've seen a few of these previously, but I've never handled one before. And it's not British. So what is it? I hear you cry. Well, let's pull that label off. It is... Oh, careful. Bloody hell. Always be very careful when you're doing this kind of thing. It's there we go. Right, bubble wrap off. So it's a sabre. It's definitely a sabre, but look at that very characteristic style of grip. And you see it's got a scooped out bit here for the thumb, which is a super nice design. And funnily enough, we do see some gymnasium modern made practice HEMA sabres with that shape, because it's very ergonomic, and it's reminiscent of course of the later 1908 and 1912 British cavalry swords. Lovely, very, very nice. So first of all, shiny guard, ergonomic grip, shark skin covered, wire in the gaps of the shark skin. A little detail, let's see, whoa, kicking the camera there. Let's see if I can get the camera to focus. There we go. Can you see there's a crest, heraldic crest on the end there, that's like a stamp, like you would stamp into wax and glue onto the outside of a letter. Let's try and focus in again. There we go. That should be the coat of arms of Bavaria. Somewhere that I have been, actually. I've been to Munich and I've been to the Oktoberfest, and this is a Bavarian officer's sword, and wow, that's been uber sharpened. Now, oh wow, oh my god, I might keep this. That is a special sword, oh my god. Okay, I personally know a lot of people who are going to want this sword. That is pretty sharp. Okay, so if I went into the garden now, I could cut water bottles with that. That is pretty damn sharp. Now, I don't know whether you're going to be able to see this, but I'm going to try and get my camera to focus on it. Can you see that blade has got a Damascus, so-called Damascus pattern on it? I don't know whether it's so. Let's see if it's got any maker's name on it. Oh, it does. It's Versberg. So it's got. I don't think you'll be able to see it because it's too small. Hold on, let's try. Right down the base, down there. Let's try and get the light. Right there, by the end of my finger, is a crowned. Focus back on my face. Is a crowned. It looks like a king with a crown on, and that's the symbol of Versberg of Solingen. A very good maker, also made British swords, yeah, so this is a Versberg, now WKC incidentally, became Versberg and Kirschbaum and Co. of Solingen, so WKC Solingen, that still exists and still makes swords today. You can still got a website, you can buy swords from them, parade swords. So this is made by WKC, and it has a pattern welded blade. Now these are sometimes, so these were known as Damascus blades. Now as I've mentioned before, Damascus is actually Woots. This is not Woots, this is pattern welded. And this looks like real Damascus. They had two types of Damascus steel on Solingen blades. I'll talk more about this in a future video, but essentially they had fake Damascus and real Damascus, or fake pattern welding, in other words etched, and real pattern welding. This appears to be real pattern welding. It's all the way along the spine, and you can even see hints of it through the sharpening. That is an amazing sword. I'll do a video probably just about German swords, because I've got a few in my collection at the moment which I could probably talk about and compare and contrast. But one important thing to note with German swords are the finger ring there. Okay, so we've got a leather loop for the index finger, much like putting your finger over the quillon of a rapier or a side sword. Okay, so it gives you extra leverage. But my word, that's a hell of a sword. Right, let's have a look at the next one. Well, on to the next sword. So I'm still recovering after that. I'm going to have a good play with that Bavarian sword later. In fact, I've got class a little bit later. My class in London. If any of you are watching this and you're visiting London, or you live in London and you want to come to my swordsmanship class, you're very welcome. £10 per class. Come whenever you want. Beginners always welcome. Blah blah blah. We've also got a class in Woking in Surrey. So again, if that's a little bit easier for you to get to, if you're from the south, then come up to that. Right, now this is two swords I'm trying to open here. These I believe are going to be, I can't actually remember what they are, but there we go, there's the first one. So these are going to be unscabbarded ones. Right, let's try and just tear that off. I do love bubble wrap, and not just because I like popping it, but because it's just really, it's nice to pack things in, and it's also good to reuse as well. You can recycle it quite well by packing other things in it. Right, so this is a typical, turn the label off. This is a typical, oh, not so typical, it's quite big. 1845 pattern, shall we call it? Some people call it an 1854, I'll talk about that in a second. 1845 pattern infantry officer's sword, British infantry officer's sword. Let's have a little look down the blade. So it's, the etching is quite obscured. There's a little bit of pitting, light pitting, and patina, as we call it. Patina is just oxidization of the surface, which makes it dark. I can see VR, we know it's Victorian anyway from the model. From the proof slug, I can't quite tell who the maker is. It's my light fitting. Now, 1845, 1854 pattern. Some people get really confused about this. 1845 pattern blade and 1822 pattern guard, but in around 1854, but actually in reality, that's what people say in books, but actually based on my observations, and I honestly consider at this point that I know better than Robson did, for example, when he was writing his book. These guards become unhinged, so to speak. In other words, they don't have a folding section on the inside, pretty much universally around 1860, not 1854. In 1854, most of the guards being produced still had a hinging section on the inside. The reason that it became known as the 1854 pattern is because there are dress regulations, and in the dress regulations of 1854, they stopped specifying that it needed to have a hinged section. However, it took a few years for the solid guard without the hinge section to become standard. So 1860 seems to be about the tipping point. But the solid guard, it wasn't like a new invention. In fact, you can find earlier examples of this guard which don't have a hinge section, which are on pipeback blades, for example, going back all the way to 1822. So the solid guard wasn't a new thing. It was just that around 1860 they went from most swords having hinged sections to around 1860, practically all of these infantry officer swords having solid guards. And of course the solid guard is stronger, but it's a little bit more uncomfortable to wear. But that's good from a swordsmanship point of view, because they went from ease of wear a little bit more in the direction of actual fighting practicality. So there we go, it's a nice example of a sword. I can't quite get to my tape measure at the moment, but it seems to be longer than standard. I might be wrong, but it looks like it might be a slightly longer blade than normal, maybe an inch longer. But it's a nice solid example. I can't tell the maker, but it could be Moll, could be Robert Moll, someone like that. But yeah, good sword. That'll be going up on my website at some point. Let's go on to the next one. here we go, opening into the next box. Being very careful not to cut myself, of course, especially because I said that I very hardly ever cut myself anymore, so if I do that on video, then that'd be pretty shameful. Right, come on. I'm sure this is highly exciting for you to watch from the top of my head while I'm grunting and groaning. Here we go, more bubble wrap, hurrah! Go away, box! There goes the box. Right, let's tear this bubble wrap off. Oh! Ah, I've just remembered what this is. I forgot that I got this. Now this is very interesting. Okay. Let's see if this comes out. I need to cut that. So, what type of swords do I love the most, sabers? What type of swords do I often talk about but don't love? Is Matt Easton out there? Don't know what you call him. Parody, something. Da 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 da. What do you think it is? It's a spadroon. It's more precisely. Oh, can't get this bubble wrap off. It's the British 1796 infantry officer's sword, or spadroon. Right, okay, it's got some damage, and that's always the risk buying from, you know, with minimal numbers of photos. So, but it does have all the blade, and more importantly, right, I'll talk about something else about the blade in a minute. So, it has a folding inner section that is quite damaged. However, I happen to know a very good restorer. So I will take this to the restorer and I will say, please fix this for me. And he will hopefully be able to do it. So you can see that one of the problems with these folding sections, as you can see, is the brass has just broken away at this end. When obviously the guard was up here, it's got smacked by something hard. And it's kind of broken the hinge section. It's nice that all the bits are still there though, so it doesn't need any replacement bits. It just needs kind of bending back into shape and a little bit of brazing. Now this wire grip, let's click on that, there we go. This wire grip is silver. And is it wire? Because some of them are actually a sheet of silver that is beaten to look like wire, but this is actually wire, feeling over it. And this is a substantial example. So I've owned a few of these in my life, and they vary a lot. You can get, so this is the type of sword that an infantry officer, a standard British infantry officer, would have worn and carried and used in the Napoleonic Wars from 1796 all the way through, officially anyway, until 1822. Now, some officers did indeed buy sabres as fighting weapons, and flank officers, for example, and rifle officers did get sabres in 1803, thereabouts, as regulation, but most infantry officers kept spadroons. They retained spadroons, and that was the type of sword that they predominantly had. So this is the type of sword that most of the British officers on foot would have had at the Battle of Waterloo, for example, or any of those other very famous, you know, Talavera or whatever, any of the other very famous British victories. Mostly, there weren't many defeats, were there, in the Napoleonic Wars, but any of the other famous battles where the British fought during the Napoleonic Wars, this was the standard infantry officer's sword, and they vary a lot. Some are very thrusting blades, some are actually quite choppy blades. You sometimes find them with like a Highland broadsword blade on, although they're quite rare. And some of them, sometimes you find them with like a small sword type thrusting blade on. But most of them have a compromise cut and thrust blade, which is what this is. And you'll see that it's not quite as broad, not quite as stiff, and the centre of percussion is not quite so far up as a sabre, so it doesn't cut as well as a sabre. And they tend to be quite flexible like this, quite light, and so they're not great for thrusting. They're certainly not as good at thrusting as a small sword is, for example. So therefore, this is one of the reasons why they were criticised in their own time. They were known as the perfect encumbrance, in other words, a nuisance, and why some officers chose to use sabres instead of these. However, there were some officers who did actually prefer spadroons to sabres, and there are some fencing treatises where they talk about you know, these as thrusting swords, essentially a combat small sword, and regard that as better than a sabre, than the crooked sabre as they talk about. So things like this, and like the 1796 light cavalry sabre here. So very different type of sword, but the same length, very different shape. And obviously one is catered very much to cutting, the curved sabre, and this one is more catered towards thrusting. I have been perhaps unfairly critical of these sort of swords in the past, but I'm not going to witter on too much about spittoons because I'll talk a little bit more about this probably in a separate video. But the one thing I want to draw your attention to before I... that's interesting. I've just noticed something I'll tell you about in a minute. Right, one thing I want to draw your attention to is the blade. Let's try and get it to focus on the blade. Now, can you see? This is what's called blue and gilt. So that blade, while it needs cleaning, you can see that what look almost like rust coloured bits are actually gilding, fire gilding, and you can see the blue of the blade around that. So this is a good quality. This is someone with money has bought this sword, and yeah, it's a good quality piece, and it's got on one side in a it's got a sort of classical figure with a shield and a spear there, which I doubt. I keep hitting my light fittings today. Maybe you'll be able to just about see. There we go. Just there. There's a figure up here, spear down there, shield there. If we go down here into a scroll, let's just focus on that. That says warranted. That means it's been tested, which of course is a great thing. If the blade's been tested before you buy it and intend to go and fight with it. It has also been service sharpened and still relatively sharp. It's got a fairly sharp point. Sometimes these get broken off and shortened, and this is its full length. But on the other side of that scroll, so on one side we've got a scroll saying warranted, and on the other side there's a scroll which says the maker's name. And I think it's Sharp and Mayo, which is not a maker I know. I'll have to look them up on oldswords.com, a very useful resource, and run by Mark Cloak, and I highly recommend you go and look at oldswords.com. And Sharp, what's amusing about this is Sharp is spelt the same way as the character, as Bernard Cornwell's character from the Napoleonic Wars series of books, or indeed the you know, the TV series Sharp. Sharp and Mayo, not a maker I know, but I will look them up. And the blue and gilt, there's actually the bluing, most of the bluing survives, which is really, really nice, and most of the gilding survives as well. So anyway, I think what I will do with this sword, because this is potentially a valuable sword, it's a very nice piece, but it needs to be professionally cleaned up. As many of you know, I do a certain amount of restoration and basic cleaning myself, but this is beyond my abilities, or rather beyond what I would feel comfortable taking on. Certainly that hinge is not something I could personally fix, and cleaning a blue and gilt blade is fraught with difficulties, because you've got the bluing and you've got the gilding. How do you clean it without removing or damaging any of the bluing or the gilding? It's difficult, but I will give this to my professional friend, and he will make this into a really nice piece, I would imagine. So what I'll do is we'll revisit this sword when it's being cleaned up. I've got one more sword to open, so let's have a look at that one. It's the longest one. So here it is, the longest box. This is the one that was the head of the scarecrow. Right, how to open this one. I'm going to open this one a little bit differently, I think. It's got a bit up here for opening. This is great. If I make it past this one without cutting myself, I've done it. I've lived up to my claims that I don't cut myself when I'm using knives. Oh, I'm almost there, it seems. This was the right choice to make. Ah, come on. Oh, oh, oh. Don't edit that into some freaky. Right, go away box. God, this is long. What could it be? I do know what it is. I do remember. And its length is a giveaway. What type of sword is really long, but not a rapier? So it's Indian. So it's a long Indian sword. And its name sounds like a race out of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Oh, look. What's that stalk sticking out the pommel? Is that to end someone rightly with? No, it's not. Oh, right, here we go. It is known as a Ferengi, which actually means Frankish or foreign. Oh, it's got a scabbard, I didn't know that. In a beautiful pattern that you could have curtains done in. So it's a Indian basket hilt with a stalk extended pommel, which for two-handed gripping or various other things. We've done videos about this in the past. And a backsword blade, an 18th century European backsword blade, probably made in Solingen in Germany. I have had one example before which I've shown where you could actually read the word Solingen in the fuller, but this one is not. That's not the case. These are super flexible and super floppy blades. They have to be because they're really long. That's about a 40-inch blade. I don't have my tape measure out, but I can guess that. In fact, I do have my tape measure to hand now because this sword's not in the way. So let's just get the tape measure out. Let me see how accurate I was. I reckon it's 39 inches. Tape measure up there. Ha ha! 39 inches on the button, I swear. Right, like exactly 39 inches. Guess I handle a lot of swords. Yeah, so 39-inch blade, it's a whopping great blade, and obviously to make a blade that long and not be unwieldy, you can see it's quite quick and quite nimble, you have to make it thin, and that means it even flops under its own weight, a bit like a Highland Claymore blade, which incidentally are also very thin and light and floppy, which is why Doug Marcaida has problems cutting with them on Forged in Fire. There's a whole video coming there. Right, so anyway, so there we go, Ferengi. So that was the last of the swords, a nice thing, big one. And again, this will be going on my website, so if you're after one of these, then keep an eye on Eastern Antique Arms. And we've also got a Facebook page. I'll put the link to the Eastern Antique Arms Facebook page underneath this video. And thanks for watching. I hope that was fun. Many or several of these swords, what have we got? 5 swords and 1 Chris, will feature in future videos, I'm sure, so you'll get a little bit more detail of those in the future. Thanks for watching. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and feel free to follow us on Facebook.